One of the most significant nights in Bellator history is just about wrapped up here at the Forum in Los Angeles, Inglewood actually to be exact. We want to be specific. The start of the Bellator World Heavyweight Grand Prix, start of a new year, start of a new network for Bellator. It was a big night all around for the promotion. I'm Marc Raimondi here for MMAfighting.com with Josh Croce of The Guardian. We're going to do a little breakdown, wrap up of what happened here just a few moments ago at the Forum. Of course, in the main event, Rampage Jackson fell to Chael Sonnen by unanimous decision in the first round of the World Heavyweight Grand Prix. And in the co-main event, Rory MacDonald came back from what looked like a pretty gruesome leg injury.
Definitely was.
To defeat Douglas Lima and win the Bellator welterweight title. Let's start with the main event, Josh, and it got some criticism this week. There was that big size difference. Obviously, both these guys are past their prime, and maybe it wasn't the greatest fight in the world. But what was your take on what happened, and were you impressed that Sonnen was able to overcome that 31-pound discrepancy to win the fight?
I think what you saw from Chael Sonnen is a more skilled fighter. Rampage has basically been the same fighter since 2008 or 2007. Always relied on being so physical, and his strength and everything put him over the top. With Chael, that doesn't really work. He's a pretty crafty fighter, and I think that he wasn't concerned about the weight advantage. The fight did play out pretty much what I had expected it to. I wasn't surprised that he boxed with Rampage, actually. I thought that he would come out and throw some hands. We saw him do that against Anderson Silva with success. And I thought that Rampage was so big, the potential that he would be a little bit slow would factor into that, and I think Chael saw that.
So we know what's next for Chael Sonnen. He's going to face the winner of a fight between Fedor Emelianenko and Frank Mir, which was Scott Coker announced officially April 28th in Chicago. That's an interesting fight for many reasons. But as far as Chael Sonnen goes, he's going to be playing the underdog this whole tournament because of just the size. Does that fascinate you? Are you interested about how this will play out?
Yeah, look, I think they put in 4 light heavyweights in this heavyweight tournament, and they put the light heavyweights against one another, which is good, so they can eliminate and sort of work through it.
Right.
Chael's going to be the least large heavyweight in the tournament, and that's just his deal, and he's going to have to rely on his guile and his skill and sort of these things, his experience to get through it. Now, he will face a legitimate heavyweight next time around. We don't know. They announced alternates, and you never know how these things play out. Sure. But in theory, it's Fedor or Frank Mir. Frank Mir, I think, is a very dangerous fight for Chael Sonnen. And so is Fedor Emelianenko, but Fedor has taken on a different style approach in recent years. And I think Chael against him might be a little bit more of an even matchup, and just in terms of heavyweight size, you're not going to see that. Fedor's an undersized heavyweight. He's always been an undersized heavyweight. So of the two of them, I think Frank Mir is a dangerous fight for Chael Sonnen.
Are you into the idea of a Chael Sonnen versus a Frank Mir or a Chael Sonnen versus a Fedor Emelianenko in 2018? Does that excite you?
Well, I mean, excite me as part of a tournament, minimally. But I think they're fun fights. I mean, you can't deny that people and the fans know these names, these personalities. All the fighters that walked out tonight at the Forum got a big ovation. Chael may have been booed after the result, but people care about him. Right. Fedor got the loudest ovation out of any fighter, and Frank Mir did as well. So, I think there's something to be said for aged fighters that we see coming over to Bellator. Some aren't aged. They sign fighters that still have a lot of life left in them. I think the key is what happens in the cage, because the dynamics didn't really work out with that Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix. The hopes were so high. I'm not sure the hopes are so high for this Bellator tournament, so it might surprise people.
Fair enough. And just for Rampage Jackson, we don't know what's next for him. Was not his greatest performance. He had a huge weight differential, I guess you could say, and he was the favorite going in. Where does he go? Do you want to see him step away? Well, where do you think Rampage Jackson's future is right now?
I thought he showed up to fight tonight. Now, it's a 253-pound Rampage that you're fighting in spurts, but he did show interest. He did show attention. Like he was in the fight the full 15 minutes. He actually won that third round. So I think fighting at this weight is too heavy for him. I'd like to see him motivated if he has any interest ever getting down to 205 again. I kind of doubt it. I saw him at the press conference at Morton Steakhouse. He likes eating steak, okay? And I don't think that's going to change very much over the rest of Rampage's career. But he's a guy the fans are attracted to. Maybe there's some fights for him. We've seen a lot of the light heavyweights in Bellator move up to heavyweight and sort of back and forth. If he's got that in him to go to 205, make it happen. But I think we've seen the best of Rampage Jackson. He's a personality now. He'll show up to fight and make a war if Bellator matches him correctly.
Let's move on now to the co-main event, and it was a fascinating fight for so many reasons. Rory MacDonald injured his leg. We're not really sure what the injury is, but he had this, I mean, it was a very large protruding, I don't know if you want to call it a welt or a hematoma, but whatever it was, I think he said afterward that he thought he had a person growing out of his leg. It was pretty gnarly. It happened in the third round, and he lost that round, but he was able to come back and win at least one of the next two, if not both of those rounds. What do you make of his performance? Obviously, he's the new Bellator welterweight champion. Just talk about a little bit what he did well and how he was able to overcome that.
Quite well. Great fight. I scored it for Lima. I had it 3 rounds to 2 for Lima. And if you had 3 rounds to 2 for Rory MacDonald, I'd take no issue with that. I thought some of the judges' scores were a little lopsided for my taste. But the first 2 rounds were toss-ups. Really, I mean, you could see them either way. And so I don't begrudge the decision at all. To me, Rory MacDonald showed that he's got life as a mixed martial artist. He was challenged. He took stiff jab after stiff jab to that nose. He held up. He got the Red King. That's Rory MacDonald. He played that game again. He seems to embrace that pain. You know, if he's not experiencing that, he's not really in a fight. And that's a really easy way to shorten your lifespan as a fighter. And we saw coming off the Lawler loss that, you know, this is a guy who will put himself through anything. The will can't be questioned. I think if there's one thing that we learned, not so much knew about Rory MacDonald, but learned that he still has is that will to fight and to compete, and that's not going to go away. And that was enough, along with a lot of skill and a lot of talent, to get past a really tough Douglas Lima tonight.
It did seem like the fight went a little bit differently than some people thought it would. Lima was the better striker. I mean, he really did get the better of Rory in many of those exchanges, and the key was, I guess, the takedowns. Did it go differently than you thought it would?
I thought it'd be a really good mixed martial arts fight. I mean, I think a lot of people were excited for this fight tonight. A lot of people were saying it was the second best fight of the night. Bellator, UFC didn't matter, and mixed martial arts. And to me, in a lot of ways, it lived up to that. I felt like Douglas Lima was getting an edge in that third round and that the fight was sort of really trending his way and he had the momentum. And to see Rory hang in there, and especially in the fifth, he was tremendous. You saw the world-class welterweight that Bellator signed. You know, a lot of people are going to admit, well, does this now mean that a guy who couldn't win a title in the UFC is now champion in Bellator? Does that diminish the rest of the Bellator welterweight class, or does it elevate it because you know you have a world-class competitor there competing? Those questions will be hashed out in time, but I think to have a fighter of Rory MacDonald's caliber now for Bellator as champion says a lot, and also they can promote him in Canada, which is what Scott Coker said he intends to do.
Right, and Rory MacDonald has a win over Tyron Woodley, which is a pretty big deal. Where would you place Rory MacDonald now among the best welterweights in the world? Is he number one? Where would you put him?
No, he's not. I mean, number one is Tyron Woodley, and I think he's shown that. You can't discount the damage that he took against Robbie Lawler, as great as that fight was, and then you can't discount the loss that followed to Stephen Thompson. That happened. He's making his name back up. I don't think he cares about being ranked number one. I just get the sense that that's not what motivates Rory MacDonald. It's about going to war and fighting the fight that he's in at that moment and doing the best that he can in that stage. And you have to appreciate that. Still a young guy. Still a lot of fights in front of him. And you wonder because of the damage he took, but he seems like he wants to keep doing this for a long time. And Bellator is definitely willing to promote him for a long time.
That's actually what I wanted to ask you. How long can he continue on this path? Because that nose has been broken, I feel like, in almost every fight over the last, without the Daly fight, because that was over pretty easily on the ground. But the Wonder Boy fight, the Robbie Lawler fight, he's complained about it. He said it's an issue that he's having. How long can he continue on this path?
Well, if you keep getting busted up every fight, that's a bad recipe. I think he's got to figure out some stuff and working on defending a jab and working with Firas Zahabi and really sort of getting that head off center line because it's a difficult thing to keep coming back from. He had surgery, reconstructive surgery, tried to get the nose back in shape where he could fight. I mean, just shows his determination and how much he really wants it. I put nothing past him. The question with him is, does the body fail him when the will doesn't? Is it a matter of sometimes you break a nose enough, it's not going to set correctly, or really affect you. His eyes blackened really quickly. So you wonder about that in the toll of the career. But, it seems like he's going to fight as long as he really wants to, and he has no intention of walking away soon.
Was the outcome of tonight's fight in the welterweight, the title bout, a good outcome for Bellator? Is it a positive, do you think, with him winning?
Yeah, I think either way it was a positive. Douglas Lima goes out and beats Rory MacDonald, validates him as a world-class competitor for the people who are foolish enough to look at him that way already. Rory MacDonald goes out and wins. Bellator has a name that they can promote, someone that a lot of fight fans know, and even though he takes damage, still has seems like a lot of life in him. He's a young fighter still. So, almost a win-win for Bellator coming out of this fight. And I would have liked to have seen a more definitive result. MacDonald got the decision. I had it the other way. But you can't really complain too much about the outcome.
Let's go to the rest of the card real quick. Michael Chandler had a pretty dominant one. It ended up being one-sided. It wasn't that way for some parts over Godi Yamayushi. What do you think of Michael Chandler's performance, and what do you think is next for him? He's talking about welterweight, doesn't want a title shot necessarily. What should be next for him, do you think?
I think he's been a really good partner for Bellator. He's the original Bellator fighter in a lot of ways, and an original Scott Coker fighter because he was in Strikeforce as well. And, I think he's a team player and very smart and gets it. I would imagine first and foremost for him is getting back to his family with his little boy. That's an amazing story. And you see a guy with all the right priorities in life, and he's just such a hard-nosed competitor. I think it's interesting that he's kind of pushing off this Brent Primus rematch. Although you heard tonight at the press conference, like, he will do that and he will take it gladly, but he doesn't think much of Primus or the way that he lost that fight. So that's the fight that makes the most sense, right? I mean, he's got to sort of avenge that if it's there in front of him. And, going up and down weight classes, that's the option for Chandler. He's got the ability to do that. But I think 155 is where he belongs. And a rematch against Brent Primus makes the most sense.
Aaron Pico had another knockout win, and boy, was that impressive over Shane Crushton. 2 left hooks to the liver that absolutely folded up Crushton. How impressed were you with Pico? And is it still a little bit too early to kind of put a rocket ship to his back?
That sailed already. I mean, that rocket ship is way gone here with Aaron Pico. He got more hype than anybody ahead of his pro debut than I think you'll ever see for any mixed martial artist. And maybe then it'll be warranted because he looks that good, like when he's figuring it out. I think getting away from AKA has been interesting for him. Going to the body shop, training with Antonio McKee and with AJ McKee, people that he knows and grew up with. He's got all the tools, and a lot of people were super hyped on him for all those reasons. I'm not going to say halt the rocket ship or hit abort. I mean, he's just getting started. So if he stays at 145, he's a very, very dangerous fighter, and we have seen a minuscule part of his game and his skill. We haven't seen him wrestle in mixed martial arts yet. Yeah. And that left hook, I mean, already in the top 5 list for, like, most deadly left hooks in the game. I mean, it's hard to argue otherwise.
That'll probably be a knockout of the year candidate by the time the year's over. We're only in January. Anything else on the card that stood out to you that you may want to highlight?
I think a lot of focus for Bellator tonight on Paramount Network, rebranding with Spike TV, what that means. It does feel different. I think Paramount's a brand that people know, and no disrespect to Spike TV and the people at Spike, they're the same people now basically running the Paramount, but the Paramount Network sounds different than Spike TV. It sounds a little bit more noble and upstanding, and it gives Bellator maybe a little bit of a push in terms of not legitimacy, but just a sense of like, oh, we're a flagship programming for Viacom now. There's no doubt about that. And I think a lot of people are looking at this Heavyweight Grand Prix as something that can drive content throughout the year. So it's a good start for the Heavyweight Grand Prix, a good start for Bellator in 2018. And you heard it here at the press conference how excited they were about getting started and what this year would bring for them.
Thanks, Josh. We'll wrap it up there. Full coverage at MMAfighting.com. We also have people in Boston for UFC 220. It's a very busy night, very busy weekend from coast to coast for us. For Josh, I'm Marc from MMAfighting.com. Stay posted here.